What is up guys, Tava here, and that 39-second sequence you just watched had 41 sound effects. And if you look at the timeline for it, it might seem a bit overwhelming, but if you actually break it down, it makes a lot more sense into why you should have all these sound effects and how you can incorporate them to make your sequences and epic B-roll parts look the best and sound the best that they can. The sound design in this B-roll sequence worked as a background behind the music, but I like to imagine when I'm adding my sounds that there's actually no music and that the only thing the audience is going to hear is the sound effects and sound design that you did. So what I like to do is just turn off my musical track so I can just hear the sound effects that I add in. And so with the same sequence, here's an example of just the sound design. As you could hear, the sequence with just the sounds was satisfying enough, and this was because of the constant variation in sounds as you can see here. Because of all this coverage, there's almost no time without some reinforcing background tone, and that's what makes the best sequence once the music has been added back, because it has an underlying sound that isn't exactly noticeable or recognizable, but it is there in the background. So honestly, for sound design in these epic sequences, I think the most important aspect is just to have constant variation and a lot of sounds like you can see here. So now what I'm going to do is go through the sounds, where I get them from, and how I kind of use weird sounds in different areas to create the most variety and interest inside of the sequence. Alright, quick side note, but when I was going through my video analytics the other day, I noticed that 95% of people who watch my videos are not subscribed to the channel. So if you like these videos and you want to watch more like them, please just hit that subscribe button. It's free, I promise, and you're gonna see a lot more super cool videos in the future. Anyway, back to the sound design. So first up, I get almost all of my sounds from Epidemic Sound, which has a great music library, as well as SFX library, which I've talked before, but you can just search for all different types of sounds and find exactly what you're looking for, which is super cool. So personally, what I do is I edit my video first so I get all the parts down how I like it visually, and then I come back through and try and find sounds that match the things that I'm looking at. So for the first one, for example, we have the picture of the scooper picking up some rice, and I needed a sound for that, but of course if I look it up, there's no thing for like rice scooper sound or anything like that. There's no tracks that match that criteria. So if I go back here, you can see what I did. Basically what I have is a drink machine ice scooper. So this is the sound of like a scooper in a hotel picking up ice from the machine, and that worked really well for the rice I found. So that's honestly one of my biggest tips, is to just be creative. Use sounds that you don't think would go in the right places and just make them work, switch some things around, and have them form into different locations, which end up sounding great. And you can see this again right here where I have the rice being poured down, but instead of a rice being poured down sound, I simply have the impact of stones being poured. So as you can hear, it sounds pretty cool. And of course, just to add that constant variation and move between sounds, I had a lot of whooshes between sequences, so I just have constant sound. So you can see this sound is fading out, and then I have a whoosh come in for the fast part and then come out as the stones pour, and then another whoosh will come between these two shots to integrate this shot into this shot. So I just have a lot of constant sound. You can see that there's no gaps between the sound design. So again, I have another shot of rice being poured, and of course there isn't a sound for that, so what I did is I kind of mixed the sound of impact of stones being poured with the sound of sand being poured, just to get that variation and complication, as well as the sound of crash debris on wood 5, which I don't really know what that is, but it sounded cool in this instance. And then for the next shot, I have rice being scooped up, but there isn't a sound for that, so I have stones being shoveled. So it's just like being picked up with a shovel, which sounds cool as well. In this part of the sequence, we have flour being poured out, and the sound I use for this is sand being poured, like out of a bowl or something, just into another container, which works perfectly. In the next shot, we have some liquids, and although it is molasses, I found that the water pouring sound effect worked just fine for it. So the next shot is one of the ones that I got the most creative with in this entire sequence, and basically what it was is some almond butter being poured out, and you can see it just looks super cool in slow motion, but there isn't a sound for that. I mean, if you go into the library and you look for almond butter, I mean, what are you gonna expect? Like, no sound effects are gonna show up for that. So what I did is I saw that it was this like flowing motion. So I tried to think like, what has a flowing motion that looks like this in slow motion. And the thing I came up with, which sounds really cool, is the sound of volcanic lava flowing. If you listen back, it's just super cool and deep in slow motion, just fits the theme perfectly. And along with that, I just mixed some pouring water sounds really softly into that sounds pretty neat as well. So honestly, that's my biggest point for this whole sound effects video. It's to be really creative with the sounds you use, and you don't have to use the exactly correct ones because no one's exactly listening in to what you've placed there, and no one's gonna notice as well. Another thing I like to do to add constant sound to the sequence, along with adding the whooshes between shots, is to add planet atmospheres, which are basically just a low rumbling sound that goes underneath to kind of enforce the areas that don't have specific sound effects. And I think that just adds a lot of depth. And so another one of my favorite sound effects in this entire sequence is with the expanding of these cookies. So as you can see, this is a time lapse of these cookies expanding, and I wanted a sound of expanding, but that's really hard to find. I mean, how do you put that into words? So what I came up with was the sound of a latex glove stretching. Like when you put it on, it just stretches out. And so what I did is just place this under the cookies, and then to make it sound more realistic, what I did is I added the pitch and I lowered it down. So it's a deeper sound of the latex glove stretching, which fits the scene much better. So yeah, just getting creative, slowing down clips, using things where they shouldn't be, and adding different pitches and levels to them really enhances sound design and makes it creative and interesting to listen to. So that's basically it for the creative sound effects. As you can see, the other ones are pretty standard. For example, I have an oven rack sliding in, which fits exactly how it should be to this shot. So you can find a lot of sound effects for things, but then more obscure things are more difficult to find. So you can just use different sounds and fit them in to make them work. And then at the very end, when the product is set down, I have a bass impact to kind of emphasize it being just plopped down on the table. So from a first glance, this timeline looks really overwhelming and complicated with all these sounds layered across from each other, but if you really get into it and just start working with the sounds and adding things for every little thing that you see, it really becomes easy and quite fun, honestly, to kind of mix these sounds and make weird things work in cool places. Again, just so you can see how much sound design does, I'm going to play the first sequence, which is no color grade, no stabilization, no sound design, no music, just the original sounds when I shot the piece. Then I'm going to play just the sound design, and then finally the final video.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's it for today. If you like this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.